Greetings, urban farmers, gardeners, and healthy food visionaries. Greg Peterson here, and welcome to the 258th episode of the Urban Farm Podcast, where 3 days a week we work together educating and inspiring you to become part of your food revolution. Growing plants that thrive in your yard is a lot easier than you think. It starts with saving your own seeds and letting them remember what they already learned. Just text SEEDS to 33444 or visit iwanttosaveseeds.com and you will receive our free webinar about why seeds matter, why saving them is easy, and how to save your own. On today's podcast, we have someone who has been helping share knowledge as her part of the food revolution. We are talking to Deb Burns of Storey Publishing about how to get a farming book published. Storey Publishing is a prolific publisher of farming and gardening books. Having roots going back to the 1970s, their in-house editors and designers embrace the challenge of complementing each author's work with book design, editing, and original illustration or photography to enhance the book's distinctiveness and make it accessible as well as practical. We have had many Storey authors on our show and thought it might be great to get useful information on how to get your book published. Deb has been an acquiring editor at Storey Publishing for 23 years, where she oversees books on farming, animals, and nature. She attended Bard College, UC Berkeley, and currently lives in the beautiful Berkshires of Massachusetts. She loves making music and traveling the world and has authored books on history and travel. Welcome to the show today, Deb.
I'm delighted to be here.
So I shared a bit about you. Can you fill in the blanks for us and share more about the path you took to get where you're at now?
Well, to get to be an editor, I was a literature major in college and then took off and traveled, pretty much majored in travel in my 20s.
Oh, nice.
Traveled all around the world. I kept a lot of journals, and really writing was very important to me. And then I lived in a commune for a few years in California in the Bay Area. And the commune had a little newspaper, and I sort of found myself working on this newspaper, which we wrote and illustrated and did all the reporting on the people that were in the commune, which were about 80 people. And it was so fun. I just said, this is what I want to do, is this kind of writing about people and what they're doing. And so then I got into sort of the publishing industry that way and eventually wended my way back to the Berkshires, where my husband and I came back here to where I was from to have our children. And after my son was 1 year old, I looked around for jobs, and there was an opening at Storey Publishing, and so I began as an editorial assistant, and then just kind of quickly became an editor, and then started acquiring books, and then now all this time has somehow gone by.
It does that, doesn't it? So let's talk a little bit about Storey. They've been around for a while and put out some amazing topics. What can you tell us about Storey Publishing?
Storey was really born in the 70s during the Back to the Land movement then, and it was a lot of people, it was very similar to recent times in terms of that people wanted to crave to kind of cut through all the middle-class stuff in the way of living and wanted to know how to do stuff themselves, to be self-reliant, to personally independent. Those are all concepts, the values that are really important to Storey. In fact, our mission statement, which we have in every book, just says we publish practical information to empower people, basically, to make them personally independent and self-reliant in harmony with the environment. So that is really such a 70s concept, and yet it's held like gold through all these years. We all love the mission statement, and even young people just out of college joining us and everybody. And it's very powerful for us as a motivator and as a sort of standard for our books.
Right.
And so we do books in a variety of categories, but always about sort of practical skills. And a lot of our books are somehow connected to food, whether food production or food preparation or preservation. So that's kind of a common theme, but we also do a lot of books on crafts. We have a fabulous craft category, and we, knitting and weaving and spinning. And then we do quite a few books on nature, which is one of my specialties, and bird watching and whatever else. And then we have really strong children's category where children can learn these practical skills, the essential skills of life, whether it's cooking and baking or sewing, or we have a whole bunch of different building. We have a lot of different concepts in the kids' world as well. So that's kind of a snapshot of what we do.
Well, and Storey Publishing has come a long way. I mean, I have on my bookshelf here at the Urban Farm some Storey published books from the 70s. I'm guessing they're 70s, and they're very simple, saddle stitched, which means they were stapled. I know there's one there on composting. It's probably the book's 5x7.
Yeah.
All black and white, all the way to, we just interviewed Laura Allen on our show here on Greywater Green Landscape recently. And I'm holding her book in my hand right now. And this is a beautiful 4-color, really well illustrated, just a stunning book. So you guys have come a long way.
Yeah. I mean, the first book you were talking about was our bulletins, which were called the Country Wisdom Bulletins.
Oh,
and
yes.
Those sold originally for a couple of dollars, and mostly it was through direct mail. And those have been from the beginning. And there are all kinds of topics, and we have hundreds of them. But we actually have stopped publishing them directly. But people always request them. People love them because, you get this practical, clear information in a very digestible form.
Right.
But, over time, obviously, everything's evolved and there's a lot more to say about everything. Also, it's been an important value for us to have our design beautiful books produced. So bringing in color, we don't want to sort of still be doing black and white books when the rest of the world is doing color.
Right.
So we've really embraced color, and we have wonderful designers, and we enlist great photographers and illustrators and have wonderful covers. So that's been a real joyful kind of progression for us.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll bet you've seen a lot of that happen in 23 years.
Yeah, certainly have. There was a time when we, were really only doing black and white books, except for a very few gardening books that really require color. But then over time, we sort of noticed how well they were doing. They all did so well that just thought, okay, it's time. And now, like Laura's book, in being in color, you could do that one in black and white.
Yeah,
but
you could have.
It was so nice to be able to do it in color. And so we have another example is we did a book a number of years ago with Temple Grandin.
Oh, wow, yes.
It's called Humane Livestock Handling, and it was a great book and really, of course, received rave reviews on Amazon and everywhere else. But it is all black and white or, illustrated. And so just now, this spring, we've just come out with a brand new book with Temple that is on really small-scale livestock handling, how to work with farm animals and using Temple's principles. And so it's in full color, and we did several photo shoots in Colorado where she lives, and just being able to show a ranch with all these sheep pouring out of one pen into another, or showing her sitting among the cows in the field, and it's just very inspiring. And so that's part of it. There's an emotional content when you have the color and the big visuals that really lifts the reader up.
So, wow. Let's talk about what it might take to get one of our books published. What do you look for in an author?
So we look for the topic really is first, unless it's an established author that already worked with and want to continue to do sort of a whole bunch of books with.
Right.
Going directly to the author first, and in particular in my categories, to be most relevant to the listeners, I really welcome farmer authors. We have some splendid writers who are authors. I really, I sort of picture them ruminating while driving the tractor, thoughts while plowing, thoughts while haying. And I just think that kind of work, it's such a good place to kind of have sort of make observations in your mind and contemplate what's going on and ponder it and think about it. And there is so much to think about as you're viewing the natural world, you're working with it, the plants, the birds and the insects and weather systems, and they find the patterns and they find the meaning, and then they have ideas and they notice what works, and then they might have a brainstorm or something like that. So as a group, I really welcome that. I would say that for our books, the writing needs to be very clear. Clarity is the very first priority, and direct and plain in a way. It's like a lot of people come to us, they've been to grad school, and they're writing in an academic style that really doesn't work for us. And we have to kind of back off, peel that back, because passive voice and it's using academic lingo and sort of like the means of accomplishing something instead of just saying how to do it.
Right.
Just plain, straightforward, not being shy about telling the reader what to do. It is a little scary to use the imperative, but that is really the cleanest way to do it.
Sounds to me it's like writing simply.
It is writing simply, yes.
Yeah.
It's writing simply as if you were just telling someone how to do something. We have authors that really exemplify this, and one of them is a very successful author, Gail Damerow, who is writes books on chickens most particularly. She's written some outstanding bestsellers on raising chickens as well. She's written a variety of books on draft horses and fencing, and I call her the Jane Austen of chicken book authors because her writing, it's direct and vivid, it's vigorous, and yet it can also humor. There's a dry quality sometimes to wit. She has a way of describing something like how an egg is formed inside the chicken, and it becomes this incredible journey, and you're just like on the edge of your seat. So it's all of that. The writing style is most important. Equally most important is having something to say.
Yes.
So that becomes the topic. And I always say the three things, or the three U's in terms of your topic or your book concept. Is it useful? Is it user-friendly? And is it unique? And those things are three things that for story are key. It has to be practical, useful. It has to be user-friendly so that it's really accessible, so someone really can replicate what you do. But the uniqueness is true of any kind of book publishing. The best thing is an original idea, an original concept, or an original way of presenting it. And then I'll just say one final thing in terms of what we look for in authors is nowadays, increasingly, they need to be able to promote the book. They need to have some, and this is a practical thing, but having some sort of platform has become really essential for us. Well, I shouldn't say essential, but it's extremely desirable that we're not starting from scratch, sort of building their name and their reputation, but that they already have their own ways of getting the word out. They're active on social media. They have a blog, or obviously they may have other books.
Right.
So having the author have energy and a following is a huge thing, to have a base already. This is a change from the old days. I mean, my dad was a writer, and in his time, writers often were introverts, just had something amazing inside them to share, but they weren't expected to then go out and sell the idea. But nowadays, it is part of what happens, and because it's just everything's so competitive, and there's so much information out there that the author really has to play a part in sort of shaping his or her own story.
Nice. So what do you recommend for an aspiring author who wants to take their farming topic to the next level?
There's a whole sort of system, a method. They should shape it into a proposal, which is a very good exercise in itself. And the proposal, they're probably pretty standard across the publishing industry. For us, a proposal includes fundamentally, first and foremost, a statement of the topic of what your book is going to be about, which is pretty obvious. But, even just a paragraph to summarize what this is and why people should be interested in it. And then from there, are there underlying trends, or is there a movement that's kind of behind this? Or is there something that's percolating, that's coming along? What are the bigger kind of picture, what's the bigger picture of the market out there, the potential audience, and how this book sort of plays a part? Is it a new take on an old idea? Is it a new idea entirely? Have you sort of solved a problem? Is it a solution to some stubborn problem? Or is it unique technique or system? And so how your idea fits into what wider interest there might be out there. And then, of course, then we would like to have a table of contents, which doesn't have to be super detailed, but to give us a sense of the flow of the book, the structure that you envision, how you're going to tell this story. And that's really probably the most important thing, aside from the opening paragraph, is just how have you developed this idea and what's really going to be in there. I mean, if we like the opening paragraph, we're probably going to be fine with your table of contents. We just want to know more about it. And then you need to tell us about yourself and your background and your platform and why you're the best person to write this book. And then you need to tell us a bit about any competitive titles out there, what other books are like yours on the same topic, or that your book kind of takes a little further. Why is your book better than all these others? Or are they kind of carving out a place where your book will be comfortable?
Right.
In the bookstore, are they kind of like showing, because of their success, that there's an audience for the kind of book you want to write, and that it'll be the same people that are reading this other book? They need to know like what's going to be the sort of competitive landscape for the book. So I think that basically it's those things. It's the topic and the table of contents. So in other words, what this book is, and then it's the market and what the world is like, where the book is going to land, why this book needs to come out, and then there's who you are and why you're telling the story, and finally, what other books are out there to sort of lay the groundwork or compete with it or anything like that.
Wow, if somebody were to do this, you're right, it is a great exercise. This is really going to inform you. I'm just thinking for me, I've got a couple of books pent up inside of me, and if I were to do this for my books, it's really going to inform the book and how it would get done, and who I'm speaking to, and is there a market for it? That's really what you're asking for.
Yes, exactly. And actually what you just said is really an important thing to emphasize, that the first thing is to determine what you want to say, but the very next thing is to say, who are you saying this to? Who is your reader? And then that informs so much. And, it's how you're going to be writing the book. But over time, it also becomes a profile of sort of an audience or a market that helps us position the book and helps our salespeople understand what it is and where and how to sell it. And your portrait of your ideal reader that you hold in your mind is really helpful. The more you know about that audience, the demographics, it's mostly a female audience. Is it a millennial audience? Is it all ages? Is it big baby boom retirement interest? And also globally, we really value, and especially in my categories, our books travel all over the world and go into many languages. And so for me, when I see a topic like Laura Allen's Greywater book and realizing that is a topic that would be useful all over the world, that's really good to know. And it's very inspiring to us when something comes along and we can see that kind of global possibilities for it, and that it could go to a village in Uganda and be useful there. So the more you, as an author, can think about where this would sell, who would read it, beyond just your mom.
Right.
So
exactly.
Just like who are the readers that you've sort of perceived out there? And one of the best parts of our jobs is we get to go to a lot of sort of conferences and things like the Mother Earth News Fair that are now, there are 6 of them all over the country, and one's coming up next weekend for the first time in New England, in Vermont. And there we really see our audience, because those fairs draw thousands and thousands of people, and they're just all moseying around looking, trying out electric cars and different ways of brewing beer, and trying different kinds of sampling food and going to workshops. We see our audience in the flesh. We go to an event like that, and I think our authors do too. And then later we may have them go to one of those events and speak or give a workshop. It happens all the time. And so then they get all this juice back from their audience. Like electric fencing. Electric fencing is huge in this audience. So you know who you're writing for. It gives a lot of energy and motivation and clarity.
Wow. That was a major nugget in itself, right? What you just shared with us. So thank you so much for that. That gives me clarity. So I know that it'll give our listeners clarity as well. Do you have any hints on things to avoid?
First of all, the academic language.
Oh, yes.
I know I'm using that phrase in a very general way, but it's the passive voice and the circling around a subject instead of just stating it. So in other words, just being fine to be the expert. You're the expert, and you just can tell as clearly as you possibly can economically. Fewer words are a great thing. It's much easier for the reader, and nowadays readers increasingly read less eagerly. I mean, they just, like if they see a long paragraph, lots of text, they can get turned off. Unfortunately, we're aware of this, and just being able to shape text so that it's really inviting and it just makes people easily flow through it. Yeah, it's really...
Yeah.
So that's one main thing. And I think also too much capital I, is a problem. It's okay now and then. It's nice for the writer to tell their own story and adds a lot of flavor, often humor and good stuff. But it's just, if you see it all over the place, then you just start thinking a bit of a turnoff to a reader. And
too much. Yeah.
And then some people say feel uncomfortable with that, so they say, we do it this way. And then you say, no, we don't need that either. Just tell the reader, what to do. Anyway, that's a little bit of a subtle thing because it really depends on the situation. But
yeah. Well, and you can use it a little bit. You just wouldn't want the whole book to be written that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you use it where it's appropriate and where it's really there's a real personal choice there. And the only other thing to avoid is pretty obvious. If there's a zillion books out there on your topic, you have to find a really unique way of telling the story or presenting it. But not to say that can't happen. You really have to kind of do a little bit of research. But I think that's pretty obvious to an author.
Right. Niche it well.
Yeah. And make sure it's a good storybook. Ideally, with any publisher, you can look at their website and see what they do and get their catalog if you can, and just get a sense of the kinds of things that your book would be comfortable next to. That is a very important thing to do and helpful. It saves everybody time if it's a good fit from the start.
So how long does it take to get a book published?
From the time the manuscript arrives to publish is at least a year. And often it's more like 14 months. And that is partly because of the careful job we do with the design and the building of the book, the commissioning of illustrations and the photo shoots. And all of those take a while, and they have to be done very thoughtfully and carefully. And then when it's a color book, it often goes overseas, which adds a month onto the time frame when it's coming across the ocean.
For printing.
Yeah. So, the whole thing is a long process, and the author is actively involved during much of that time, although there's sort of some periods that are kind of black holes where it's completely out of the author's hands and it's out of the editor's hands. And so there's kind of a period of drought there. And so it takes a long time. And we, acquiring editors, are always looking out 2 years. We're like right now we're acquiring for 2019, for the fall of 2019. We're just about to step into 2020.
Right.
It's like amazing. But we're having to think, I always say it's like we're standing at the very prow of the ship and we're looking out ahead into the fog. What's going to be happening 2 years out? That can be a challenge because sometimes you think, okay, well, definitely peak oil is not going away. And 2 years ago we'd have said peak oil is not going away. And now suddenly we're in this oil glut. That kind of thing can happen that you just can't predict. You couldn't predict what the country's state of mind would have been now. And you also couldn't predict things like colony collapse disorder with bees and the kinds of issues that would be coming up. So the books have to have some flexibility during that 2 years in terms of managing to be nimble enough to kind of absorb changes. So we are able to do that right up till the end, just before it goes to the printers.
Well, and the truth of the matter is that 2 years flies by so fast. When I'm 56 years old now, and I look back 2 years ago and it's like, whoa, what happened?
Right.
It just flew by. So if you have a book you're thinking you want to get published, now's the time to start. And if you write 500 words a day for the next year, you're going to have a book.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And plenty of authors do it much more quickly. In terms of the writing part, we give the author often a year, but sometimes it's just 3 months. Sometimes they've already got it mostly written, which is one thing that I do recommend. If we are taking a while on a decision on a book, whether to do a book, or if we ultimately have to turn it down, I'm always thinking, I think that author should just be writing. They should just be writing it, because not waiting for the contract before they start. They should be writing now when they've got the energy, and because they're going to have a book then. And once they've written it, it's going to happen. But not to wait until they actually have the first advance check. That just seems to me not right. Especially because we often do work with new writers. We love working with new writers, and they should know that it's the best thing to do is just to get it going and get into it and start confronting the reality of writing a book before it's actually on deadline.
You're an acquiring editor there. Assuming I'm going to write a book for you, how do you help me as an author?
So what do I actually do?
Yeah, what do you do?
Yeah. Well, let's see. It's a really good question. First of all, we receive the idea from you. And it's really our most important job, I think, is to help you shape that idea so that it will be accepted by us and so that it works for us, so that our salespeople immediately say, oh, yes, can we have this tomorrow? That's the best thing when you hear that. And I'm sorry, it's going to be 2 years, but to be able to help an author develop the idea into a workable proposal to help them look at their table of contents and organize that. That's all part of what we do ahead of the game, but it's a very important thing. And then we also help you with the proposal itself in terms of helping you identify trends or important websites or other books you might want to know about or people that you might want to know about and just what's going on in the market. We do a lot of sort of immersing ourselves in the world of the book as we're kind of helping you develop it so that we're as knowledgeable about it as possible. And then we then take that proposal, once it's ready, we take it and present it to our entire company, which is a big moment. It's a wonderful moment. I really love it. And we're sharing this for the first time, and we have to defend it, sort of like a dissertation or something, where we have to say why we think this is a great book and why you're the only person that could have written it and all of that. And then they ask us questions, and they have good questions, and we have to kind of think of the answers and think on our feet. So we're representing you in that. We're your advocate. And then we also have to help formulate sort of the look of the book. You know, we sort of conceptualize that with you, and then we have a really gifted art design staff that weigh in on that and put in their ideas, and they always have really good ideas. And then once we've got salespeople and everybody saying, let's do it, then our team puts together a budget based on sales projections and cost estimates. And when the budget balances, then we have the green light, and then we draft a contract and send it to you, and you mull it over, and hopefully you say yes, and you sign, and then you get going on it if you haven't already. And then during the process, we have a due date set in the contract, and so you may be in touch a lot, or you may not be. You may be just happily writing, but then you submit the book, and at that point, we dive into what's called the substantive editing, which is where we really read it for content and organization, and we might be helping add subheads and saying, well, shouldn't this chapter be here, or should this really have parts with chapters in them, and looking at all the art that you will have also suggested art. You will have sent a wish list of art, illustrations, photography, or diagrams, infographics, whatever. And so we go over that really carefully with you. And then after that sub-edit phase is done, we send it to a copy editor who dots the I's and crosses the T's, and does a little bit of checking of facts, with any references they check. And then we send it all back to you with queries all over it, just like festooned with queries that, did you really mean this? Or I don't think it's spelled right, or whatever. You know, I mean, we will have all kinds of things, and then you have to address all of those one way or the other. Although you don't have to say yes to everything we propose, but you just have to have looked at it and thought about it. Yeah. And then you finish it up, send it back to us. You can add anything at that point. Then we get it ready to transmit to production. And meanwhile, we get illustrations and photography underway, and then it goes into production, and it's meanwhile had a sample design done, which is a big thing, and then gets flowed into the design. Then you will be seeing sets of pages as they evolve, and then we see them, go over them very carefully, and there may be all kinds of tweaks that are needed, or, there usually are. And then we kind of shepherd it along, and eventually it goes through all its processes, goes into pre-press, and then goes off to the printer. And that's what we actively do with you.
Right.
But we also stay with you. You get sort of turned over to our publicity and marketing department, who then handle all the promotion things. We sort of stay with you in the big sense, because if you have another book idea, then you'd bring it to us again. Right.
And here I thought writing it would be the hard part. Sounds like writing it's going to be the easy part.
Well, writing it seems like that's all you need to do is that one thing. But that within that one thing, there's so much. With editing, there's just a lot of little things within that thing. There's so many different tasks. But with writing it, you just need to write the thing.
So speaking of writing, you've written a few books as well.
Well, I first wrote a book for Storey that was a travel book that another author had started, and I had done so much traveling that I was making so many suggestions that I think it got really irritating for her. This was way back when I had just been there a couple of years. And ultimately, she pulled out of the project, and it was a lot of fun. But then after that, I've done books on local history. I wrote a book on the New England Shakers, which was just an utter blast to do, and another work of local history. And so those have been my books. And I also was a columnist for the Berkshire Eagle for many years, which was about nature and history. And that's a wonderful exercise for anyone who likes to write, is being able to have a regular, every 2 weeks column with a specific word count and everything. It's a great discipline. You're thinking, what am I going to write about? What am I going to write about? Yeah. But you learn a lot, because you learn that even something that you force out of yourself can still, people can say, I love that one, and you're just like, what?
Yeah.
But you learn a lot about your own writing. I was also a reporter, a journalist, and that's when I went back to, when I went to UC Berkeley, it was for journalism, and so I was a journalist in India for a while and learned a lot about writing there, and about especially the importance of being terse, because writing for a newspaper is such good practice, because you really have to learn how to be condensed and just have it as full of meaning as possible without taking up a huge amount of space. I recommend that for people that are thinking about writing this kind of book. Newspaper writing is or just even reading newspaper writing, you learn a lot from how it's done.
Oh, cool. And I'm going to shift on you now. And I'd like for you to talk about a time you failed, how you overcame that failure, and what you might have learned from it.
Okay. Well, so the word failure is an interesting one. It's really not in our vocabulary here at Storey.
Good.
And I think that's because we're a company and we collaborate really closely on these books. And so each book has a team of people on it, probably 12 people that are working on it at some point in all the stages of its life. And everybody's really invested in it and, putting their all into it. And the thing is that I'm saying this as a fact, not as bragging, but we don't do bad books. We only do excellent books. They're useful and they're beautiful, and many of them are sort of important. And the book itself is never a failure, because it's test of fire. There's so many meetings about it, and people are saying, oh, that cover is not working for me, or you burn out all the imperfections and you come out and it polishes it through the process, so that we're really proud of every book we do, and sometimes we're just amazed at them. So that is not where a failure might lie. It sometimes doesn't find its market, and so that can be something that I might take on as my own failure in terms of it. It's the market might have shifted, and so for me, thinking a book would work and it doesn't would feel like a failure. I'd feel like it was a disappointment to the author and to everyone who worked so hard on it, and I would know that it's a really good book, and why isn't it finding its audience? So how you deal with that is just to work all the harder to know as much as you can about the world that the book is going to land in. And so it's really, as I say, the book itself is going to be good. It's just how it's going to be received. So that's one type of thing. And then another thing I think is asking an author to do something that they can't, which might mean asking them, I need such and such as to be added to this. And then it's very hard for them because it's not a kind of experience they've had or writing they've had. I mean, I could see that that could be a problem, but it also can be that some may just not be able to do the kind of promotion that is required nowadays, which is some still are introverts or want to be on their farm. Farmer authors, they tend to have a hard time leaving the farm for many reasons. And that is something that it's not a failure exactly, but it's definitely something that it's a challenge that you have to kind of work around and figure out. I guess the main thing is that it's a complicated topic, and it's no one's fault if a book doesn't sell well, but nevertheless, you can feel really bad about it, feel really sorry about it. And I think you have to do the best you can in a sort of a flowing river of stuff, of trends and changes in the world, and just have to do your best to find your footing in that flowing river, and to make sure that the ultimate quality of the book is really strong. So I don't know if I'm answering your question directly, but this is how I see it. It's just really a shared experience that everybody works really hard on together. So we think of it as something that we're all going to learn from. For instance, someone who did the cover design might say, the reason that book didn't work was because of the cover, darn it. Everybody might sort of take a bit of responsibility for it, but you don't want it to cramp people's style and to have them feel like, I'll never be able to design another cover. They need to be able to keep producing. You need to have the writer continue to write if you want to have more books from them. It's like a teacher. You have to encourage them to keep striving, to keep doing it as best they can.
So what drives you?
Well, I think the quality of the books. As you were saying, how time can go by so quickly, you are, in this case, I would be, proposing a book, and then I'm thinking, oh my God, 2 years from now, this is going to be out. And then 2 years just flies by, and it's a book. And so we really see Life kind of is in these 2-year segments in a way, but they're all overlapping like fish scales. There's one book is finishing, but you're deep in another one, and then you've got another one that you're proposing. And so there's a whole momentum with that, and creative, especially at the beginning of a book when you're conceptualizing it, and there's a lot of creative excitement. And then when you're deep in it, it's also really exciting. And then at the end, just like you're racing to meet the deadline with the final corrections, and you've looked at this thing 18 times, but now you're really hitting the rapids, and you really have to get that book to the printer. Exactly. There's the imperative of the printer. And then a couple months later, it lands on your desk, the first advanced copy, and you have that thrill. So there's a lot of moments along the path that are pretty great, give a lot back.
And I love what you said earlier. You polish the book through the process. That is beautifully said.
Through many hands.
Yes, yeah. If you could recommend one book, what would it be and why?
There's a few in my mind, but I think what I would recommend, since I want to be practical and helpful to your listeners, if they were interested in writing a book for Storey, I would suggest that they look at one of Gail Damero's books, since I mentioned her already, in terms of how to write prose that's both very clear but also just so readable. And I mean, she hardly needs any editing at all. And we might have a question now and then, just to see it's got good pacing, which is something even nonfiction needs. So I would just suggest they look at her Storey's Guide to Raising Chickens, or her Chicken Health Handbook even. You wouldn't believe a book on chicken health would be fascinating and compelling, but this is what we would strive for. So that's what I would say is a good model.
Perfect. And what one final piece of advice will you have for our listeners?
I think it's finding your own voice and your own topic. I really feel that voice is what sells books, is what makes a bestseller, is the unique voice of an author, whether it's just their own kind of life creeps into it, or their humor, not heavy-handed, but just a quality to the writing that is just uniquely theirs, that is fresh. And that finding your own voice would be my advice.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Deb.
My pleasure.
So how can our listeners get a hold of you?
They can email me. It's Deb, Deb.Burns, Burns, at Storey, Storey.com. Deb.Burns@Storey.com.
Perfect. And you can find all of Storey books at Storey.com, Storey.com.
That's right. And we actually have on there, we have some information for prospective authors as well.
Oh, beautiful. You can also find show notes from today's podcast at urbanfarm.org/Storey Publishing. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us on the Urban Farm Podcast. Do you want to save money at the grocery store, eat more organic, whole foods, cultivate food security, and feel more connected to the earth? If so, then growing your own food is a no-brainer. You wouldn't believe how many people come to me claiming that they can't grow their own food. They think they don't have enough space, that they're too busy, or that they simply don't have what it takes. Perhaps you've fallen for one of these gardening myths. If you think you can't grow food, or if you think the only food that you have access to is what you buy in the grocery store, I have a life-changing webinar that you need to see. It's free and will help you unearth your inner gardener. I've helped thousands of people just like you learn to grow their own food, and I'm speaking from my own experience when I say that with the right knowledge in place, there is no such thing as a black thumb. With this webinar, you can begin making your garden dreams come true and start growing delicious, nutritious food for your family. Just text GARDEN to 44222 or go to iwanttogarden.com and you will receive our free webinar about the 7 key factors you need to know to grow your own food. Remember, that's GARDEN to 44222 or iwanttogarden.com.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Urban Farm Podcast. Remember to listen 3 days a week for tips, advice, and resources to help you on your journey with urban farming. You can find us on the web at urbanfarm.org or send us an email to podcast@urbanfarm.org. In the words of Vincent van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Be encouraged that with each lesson learned and skill developed, you are one step closer in the direction of your dreams.